Let's kick it off with the AFC East. Steven, I'll go to you first. Who's your most improved team in the East?
I mean, this was the hardest one to pick out. And like almost by default, I had to pick the Jets because what I looked at was what should have been the objective going in. And with the Bills, I think it was kind of maintaining and keeping that championship window opening while also purging your roster of some of the expensive vets. And I don't think they did that first part. While I do think they did a good job of that second part, I do think the roster's in a much better spot than it was. And then the Patriots, I do think they came away with this offseason with renewed hope because they got Drake May, but their offseason moves weren't meant to move the needle. And then the Dolphins kind of had to get rid of some guys that kind of had the same offseason as the Bills. We just didn't really notice it. So for me, it's the Jets who I think the objective coming in was just get to a point where we can all envision this team being good if Aaron Rodgers is healthy. And I think with the additions, whether they stay healthy or not, Mike Williams, Tyron Smith, the two offensive linemen from the Ravens, I can envision this Jets team not only being a contender for the playoffs, but I think it could be the best team in this division if Aaron Rodgers is healthy. And I think the moves Joe Douglas pulled off this offseason have helped them and have pushed them forward, whereas the moves the other teams in the division have made have kind of pushed them back.
I think we should acknowledge, because Steven, you're speaking to an important point about just how this exercise works, that yeah, that's the name of the game, is improved for next year, right? It's not purely, do we agree with the moves? Because I think by and large, the Bills have had a pretty well-reasoned offseason.
Right.
But I also think because of the financial situation they were in, because of the age of their roster, and because of the need to purge some of those players, that doesn't necessarily mean that I think this September, the Bills have a better roster than they did last season. And it's the better going into next year that we're looking at. So I meant to point that out, but you reminded me of it. Austin, did you go with the Jets as well, or did you have anybody else here?
Jets, Jets. I'm with Ruiz. I think it was really underrated in the offseason how much Miami was doing exactly what Buffalo was doing. And that we're not in a good cap situation. We don't have a lot of money. We aren't going to be able to retain or add a ton of talent in free agency. And I think that they've had a minor exodus or a minor purge of talent in the same way that Buffalo has. And then with the Patriots, they're, I think, have the worst odds to make the playoffs of any team in the NFL. Yes, they added talent. Yes, they got better, but I still don't think you could call them the most improved in this division. With the Jets, they improved for this year, right? This is a last ride. I think I made this analogy last time. This is that experiment where you wrap an egg in as many tools as you can, like duct tape and tissue paper and stuff like that. And you're just going to drop it one time for the one time, see what happens. Mike Williams and his ACL, Breece Hall tore his ACL 2 years ago. Aaron Rodgers,
a shocking amount on this podcast.
Yeah, I like to bring it up. It's an important one. I think we learned a lot from it.
It's a good metaphor.
Both their offensive tackles, are 33 years old. Tyron Smith hasn't played a full 16-game season since 2015. Mike Williams, I've already mentioned him. Aaron Rodgers, obviously coming off the Achilles. And then I also feel that this is the last ride for Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh. If you don't make the playoffs this year, I actually think if you don't win a playoff game this year, good night. It's over. You don't get 3 swings of the bat at quarterback. I can't imagine. And I know they've added talent. Ahmad Gardner and Breece Hall's really talented. And Garrett Wilson's really, I get it. But you don't get 2 shots. You don't get Zach Wilson, and then you get to punt on that for a day 3 pick swap, and then Aaron Rodgers. And if this doesn't pan out either, I do think they end up cleaning house. So I do think it's one last ride. We're dropping the egg at the top story. And if they win a couple playoff games, maybe people come back and we have to rebuild and figure out who the quarterback of the future is. But they are the most improved team, but I don't think they are built for the future. That's for sure.
And we can turn our noses up at that style of roster building, but you look at the last couple of years in the NFL and the teams that are winning the Super Bowl, not that this is that's proof because it is a small sample size, but the teams that are winning the Super Bowl are the ones that use this dropping the egg model. The Bucs, it was 1 or 2 years at most. The Rams, it was 1 or 2 years at most with Matthew Stafford. And I think the Jets are in a similar spot. And I think it's a commendable way to build a team rather than just being give me 7 years and a bunch of second round picks to build a roster like Chris Ballard. I would not want to root for that.
There's also an argument, I was thinking about this too, there's also an argument that it's lower risk. Yes, that's coming after Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas are probably going to get fired if they don't win a playoff game, but they're going to get jobs elsewhere because the vision is so clear. Hey, we brought in Rodgers. He got hurt. It didn't work out. We're ready to swing this bat again. to take to another analogy, if you're a GM and a coach combo that takes like 3, 4, 5 years to build this massive Lego set and it like falls on its ass after 4 years, cough, cough, Trent Baalke, like you're not going to get another shot. Like no one's going to want to see you build that Lego again. Like no one wants to see you go get a full 4 or 5 year plan again if you don't make that work. Whereas with the Jets, they tried with Zach Wilson, they punted quickly, honestly, and then you move to Rodgers. I do think that Saleh and Douglas still have legs in the league if/when this doesn't pan out.
I think the Jets are the right pick. I want to make a quick, I'll make a quick argument for the Patriots in the sense that, you know, if you're counting Rodgers coming back as the Jets improving, then it's probably indisputable. But that doesn't really count, right? Because he's not an offseason move. He's just coming back from injury. And I do think in New England, they did a lot less in free agency than the Jets. But I do think in New England, it's maybe getting a little bit underrated, Drake May's potential to contribute in year one. This is something that Ben Solak wrote about in his column this week on theringer.com. But the history of highly drafted quarterbacks in the zone of a third overall pick says that he's going to play this year. I even think that, you know, Jacoby Brissett is going to give them an upgrade over what they were getting out of the quarterback position last year. And, you know, I like both the additions of Jalen Polk and Javon Baker to the receiving group. I think they had a really smart draft. I like that they went really heavy on offense because that's the side of the ball that really needed some help there. So I think just because the build, and it should be this way, right? Like Drake May needs some time to develop and that offense has a lot of room to grow. I think because the understanding is that this is a work in progress and this is not a team that is trying to compete now and prioritize how many games they're winning in 2024. Although if you talk to Robert Kraft, I think maybe it's becoming a little bit underrated, their potential to improve this season on the offensive side of the ball, even if it's just a step in the right direction. I'd give it to the Jets, but I want to make a quick argument for New England. Lindsay, did you go with New York as well?
I did, although I was with Steven that I feel like this was kind of the hardest division to determine like a clear winner and loser, a team that got a lot better and a team that got a lot worse. Because I feel like in a lot of ways, nobody made a significant move there. The one thing I do want to like bring up with Miami, and I don't know if this is like a plus or a minus or where exactly this falls into their offseason moves, is that the biggest move that's kind of been hanging out there for them hasn't happened yet, and that's paying Tua. And I feel like if all of a sudden in 2 weeks or 2 months at some point between now and, you know, training camp, they give him $50 million a year, I think that will color a lot of the way that we have viewed their offseason, their future plans, and kind of their resource allocation.
Did anybody put Miami as the least improved?
Yeah, that's why I would pick them as like the worst offseason of this bunch, just because one, you've lost contributors. You've lost Christian Wilkins. You've lost Robert Hunt. You've lost Xavier Howard. I know he's been hurt. You lost Andrew Van Ginkel. You lost Jerome Baker. I know he was hurt last year. But you lost a lot of talent. I think you lost a good defensive coordinator in Vic Fangio, and you replaced him with an unproven one from the Ravens staff, which I think could work out in the long run, but we still have to wait and see it. We don't know how Mike McDonald's assistants are going to work out in the long run. And then on top of that, like if we're comparing them to the Bills have Josh Allen, whereas the Dolphins have this question mark that's just festering even more now that we've gotten to this point in the offseason with Tua Tagovailoa. And like, honestly, there isn't a great solution to this problem they have. So like, I don't know what happens with Tua over the next couple of months where I look at it and go, oh yeah, the Dolphins did a good thing. And like, they're set up better for the future because of it, outside of like trading him for a bunch of first round picks, which I don't think is going to happen.
Anybody want to make the argument for Buffalo or New England?
I will say that for Buffalo, they were in the conversation for me. I ended up picking Miami, but they were in the conversation for me because I feel that if the Buffalo Bills win this division, and they are favored to win the division, it's a narrow favorite, but they are favored. It's going to be a Herculean career best performance from Josh Allen. Like he's going to take a next step, like a similar next step that we've seen Mahomes take like 2 or 3 years ago. And that I think I'd rather bank on that happening and him improving year over year and him improving, continually as he grows in his career than Tua Tagovailoa unlocking something after what was a rough offseason for Miami. Like, they weren't able to bring a lot of these guys back. The only saving grace that I'm stewing on is if I can hear see through the smoke screens, Mike McDaniel coming up with another wrinkle to this offense. Last year, weeks 1 through 6, third best rushing offense by EPA we've seen in the last 20 years. The cheat motion was the most copied concept in football that I can honestly remember since like the Wildcat, and that died immediately. If McDaniel gets back in the lab and comes up with some other fairy dust type of magic, maybe the Miami Dolphins do get back on a heater. I feel like we forget they scored 70 points in week 3. They were averaging 37 points a game in weeks 1 through 6. Like, he can get in the lab and make some plays. So if he has another trick up the sleeve, what's in his bag, right? What's in Mike McDaniel's bag? Because if he's got something, I'm gonna
By the
need
way,
it,
white Bottega Veneta
grace.
backpack Mike McDaniel carries around league events. Just
Now we're
throwing
talking.
it out there.
Now we're talking.
I do think you bring up a good point, and that the Dolphins coaching could be underrated. And I don't know what this defensive staff is going to look like and how they're going to coach, but there is a chance that they can like replicate maybe 65% of what Baltimore had going on with their defense. And if that happens, like, and Mike McDaniel does have another wrinkle, which I mean, he's had a new wrinkle like for the past 5 years, even going back to his time as a 49ers assistant. Like, I do think they can make up for the offseason, but that doesn't change the fact that this was a bad offseason for him.
People were writing articles about the Dolphins at the end of the 2022 season, Mike McDaniel's first year, like, is there a blueprint out for this offense? Do you just have to press at the line? And like, they lost a lot of games down the stretch. And then you go into next year and like literally people were calling him the greatest show on surf. They're ready to give the offense a name. Like, it was so unsolved. It was funny. And like, obviously down the stretch of last season, it wasn't where they wanted to be. And Tua did not show up in these big moments. Ruiz, you wrote a great article for TheRinger.com on that exact topic. I still think Mike McDaniel has more. And maybe that's greedy. I'm greedy, but I still think he has more, and I'm excited to see it.
He has to have more is the thing.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
Right. I still think I hear everything you guys are saying. I don't want to underrate just how much walked out of Buffalo this offseason. I don't have this in front of me, but I remember we talked on another show about how they lost something like 5,000 snaps from starters in free agency. I mean, just in terms of the releases alone, you know, Jordan Poyer, Mitch Morse, Trey White, the number of just like real contributors that they had to cut in addition to the free agent losses just feels really significant. And then in the draft, I think Keon Coleman has a lot of upside, and that was a good recovery from just trading back on night one. But it's still, they're just left in the situation where so much went out then came in, which might be good for the long-term health of the roster. But I think it's tough to see how they're in a better position to start 2024 than they were at the end of last year.